there. You're watching World 360 on CNN News 18. I'm Maha Siddiqui. Over the next half an hour, we'll take you through all the major international stories of the week. Our pivot, Russia moves westwards in its attack on Ukraine, coming very close to the border with Poland. This even as capital Kyiv continues its pushback of Russian troops, and the warring sides agree over 9 humanitarian corridors for civilians to evacuate. Amidst all this, India warded off pressure from the West to cater to its own domestic energy needs. India is buying discounted oil from Russia and has rejected value judgment over its move by pointing out that 75% of the Russian energy is exported to a bulk of European countries themselves. What does it mean for India and its equation with the West? That's our focus this evening. But before the deep dive, a look at the headline. Russia widens its attack in Ukraine, heads westward, strikes near the airport in the strategic city of Lviv, very close to the Polish border. India makes it clear it is buying discounted oil from Russia as fuel prices soar. White House says American officials in touch with India over the issue. And Sri Lanka gets an economic lifeline from India with a $1 billion line of credit. Colombo eyes Indian investment in its port city with existing Chinese involvement. As Russia's invasion of Ukraine enters its 4th week, we're going to give you some shocking visuals emerging from the war now. First, the visuals of a theater in Mariupol. And this is the shocking before and after of the Russian attack. Over 130 people have been rescued from the rubble so far, but there's still no word on the hundreds of other civilians who were taking shelter in that theater. The second largest Ukrainian city now, that is Kharkiv, which has been relentlessly seeing Russian attacks since day one, was struck 65 times earlier this week. In these visuals, what you can see are cars that have been reduced to virtually rubble. Housing complexes also brought down. Meanwhile, Russian forces close in on the capital Kyiv. They are now barely 7 to 10 kilometers away from the city center of Kyiv. Airstrikes on the city have intensified. In this video, what you can see are high-rise apartments. There you have it, which have been attacked and are simply crumbling down. An oil depot, meanwhile, was bombarded in Zhytomyr last week, leading to a massive fire. Now, earlier this week, the residential areas in that city were also targeted. And coming to the final visual now from Chernihiv, a city that has also seen massive shelling. One of the main attractions in the city, the Yuri Stadium, also attacked this week. CNN's Salma Abdulaziz is now joining us live from Lviv in Ukraine. Salma, the reports from Lviv suggest that the Russian attack has moved towards the extreme west as well now. What is the current situation like over there?
Absolutely. The Russian advance, has widened, expanded, intensified to include the west of the country. There's been several strikes in this part of Ukraine. Just yesterday, an aircraft repair facility on the outskirts of Lviv's international airport was hit by several Russian missiles. It was the first missiles to be struck inside the Lviv city limits themselves. But it's this expanding attack that has so many civilians here worried, and it of course brings this war ever closer to NATO's doorstep. We're just under 50 miles here from the Polish border, so there's a sense that Russia is continuing to expand its attacks here in Ukraine.
Salma, Ukraine had said that it will not give up its EU bid as a compromise to Russia. So what is Ukraine willing to put out as compromise for negotiation?
So Ukraine has said that it is willing to discuss the issue of neutrality. Now, there's a lot of details that need to be hammered out when it comes to that terminology. Are they looking at an Austrian-style model, or what exactly would be meant by neutrality? For now, Ukraine offering that they would not join NATO, not that NATO had offered that to them in the first place. They're also discussing the possibility of limiting foreign troops, so Western allies' troops' access to Ukraine. That could mean limiting joint exercises, preventing bases bases from Western allies being built here. But all of this is still being discussed. We're in the fourth round of negotiations. There's a lot more demands there that Russia wants to see. Still a lot of questions about what Ukraine is willing to concede. But we did hear from President Zelensky today, who issued a video address on Saturday saying now is the time to talk. He urged his Russian counterparts to come to the table to speak directly with these peace negotiations. He says it's time for Ukraine to restore its territorial integrity, to find justice. And he's warning Russia. He says, look, otherwise you could face major losses here in Ukraine.
All right, Salma, many thanks for joining us with all those details from Lviv. Now, even as the Ukraine crisis continues to escalate and the pressure on India grows to side with the West, India has taken a decision to import discounted oil from Russia. This has received a response from the White House too. Listen in.
Well, we made a decision about banning the Russian import of oil. Every country has not made that decision, and we recognize that, and they have different economic reasoning as to why different countries do, including some in Europe. We have been in touch, of course, with Indian leaders at a range of levels, not through the president. If that happens, we will, of course, provide that readout and information to all of you. But what we would project or convey to any leader around the world is that the rest of the world is watching where you're going to stand as it relates to this conflict, whether it's support for Russia in any form as they are illegally invading Ukraine.
So why is India choosing to import oil from Russia under these circumstances? First of all, India has made it clear that at this critical juncture, India welcomes the offer of oil from all possible producers. This is because of the stress that India is itself feeling. Meanwhile, what we are also hearing is that Ukraine crisis is adding more pressure for competitive sourcing of fuel for the country. Meanwhile, remember, India had stopped sourcing from Iran and Venezuela earlier on because of sanctions, and therefore the pressure has only been increasing. Alternative sources are coming at a higher cost for India, which means that there is a jump in prices in the domestic market. This has added to challenges. 75% of the takeoff. Meanwhile, this is what India is pointing out as a counter of Russian energy is to Europe. So restrictive trading being in fact preached to India is not something India is welcoming at the moment. Meanwhile, for the first time after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, US President Joe Biden had a video call with another important player, his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping. The call lasted an hour and 50 minutes, with US raising concern over China's possible military support to Russia. America warned Xi Jinping that doing so could invite sanctions from the US and European countries. Beijing voted with Russia and the UNSC, but during the call, President Xi is believed to have said that the conflict is not in anyone's interest. Those were the pictures of the video call that was made yesterday between President Joe Biden and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping. The issue of Taiwan also came up during the talks, in which the US side is reiterating once again that they still stick to their old stand on Taiwan and one China policy. So clearly a gamut of issues there discussed, but of course the most important aspect of this meeting, or the video call between the two sides, which was considered cordial, was the Ukraine crisis and the fact that China could be playing a role in supporting the Russian side. Let me bring in Jasmine Wright from Delaware with more details on this. Jasmine, what explanation, if any, has been given by President Xi over reports of possible support extended to Russia, both in terms of military equipment and the information warfare that we are seeing as well?
Well, China has denied that they are weighing a decision of whether or not to come to Russia's aid in this ongoing conflict, either providing them with military or financial assistance, as U.S. officials have warned that they are doing for about a week now. But nonetheless, President Biden, in that call with President Xi yesterday, he was direct when warning of both the consequences and implications if Russia should do what U.S. officials fear. And of course, this comes at a pivotal time where U.S. officials feel that China could have an outsized influence in the trajectory of the ongoing conflict. And of course, whatever decision that they make could affect U.S. and Chinese relations for decades to come. So in this nearly 2-hour-long phone call, which officials described as direct, substantive, and detailed, they really said that basically trying to kind of assess where China stands on this stance. And now one thing for his part, President Xi told Biden, according to Chinese state media, is that he believes that it's up to both sides, both the U.S. and China, to ensure peace around the globe. And they both agreed to continue these conversations with their officials as time goes on, really trying to find some type of solution to the conflict.
Jasmine, what did President Biden then say on that call to President Xi?
Well, on Taiwan, something that came up on this call, according to both sides, the president reiterated that the U.S. policy on Taiwan has not changed. And I want to read you a quote from an official statement released from the White House after the call. They said that they emphasized that the United States continues to oppose any unilateral changes to the status quo. That is the U.S. policy on Taiwan going forward. And now we're not sure exactly who brought up the issue of Taiwan on the phone call. That was not described by U.S. officials afterwards. But according to Chinese state media, they said that President Xi told Biden that the Taiwan issue needs to be handled properly to avoid a subversive impact on bilateral relations between both countries. Because at the end of the day, that is what this long, almost nearly 2-hour phone call comes down to, is trying to figure out U.S. and China relations as it comes to conflicts around the globe. And so, again, they they agreed to continue the conversation and of course, trying to kind of find a solution going forward.
Jasmine May, thanks for joining us with all those details. Meanwhile, talking about China, top government sources have told CNN News 18 that China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi is going to visit India next week. Diplomatic and security bilaterals are slated to take place with External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar and National Security Advisor Ajit Doval. But there's no confirmation on whether he'll meet Prime Minister Modi as well. So why is this visit of Wang Yi significant? This is going to be the first high-level meeting between the two sides that we'll be seeing. Rather, the first incoming visit of a Chinese dignitary after the Galwan Valley clashes that took place in 2020 and the friction that started in eastern Ladakh in 2020. Bilaterals have been suffering since the Galwan Valley clashes, and therefore this visit assumes significance, even though it is clubbed with other countries in the region that Wang Yi is going to be visiting, including Nepal. Now, China's role in aiding Russia at this moment is under the scanner as well. This is with regards to the Ukraine crisis. Meanwhile, China and India trade relations have gone up, despite the fact that there was constant warning from India that the eastern Ladakh friction could have a fallout on the overall bilateral relations between the two sides. Meanwhile, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida met Prime Minister Narendra Modi at Hyderabad House in the national capital. The India-Japan annual summit is being held after 3 years due to the COVID situation and the anti-CAA protests. Before that, the summit is significant due to the current Ukraine crisis and the Quad summit that will be held in about a month from now in Japan that will closely focus on China's influence in the Indo-Pacific. A quick check now of some of the other stories that we are tracking.
Southeast Asia is seeing a fresh surge in COVID cases and a new variant, stealth Omicron. South Korea recorded over 600,000 cases in a single day this week, while China has over 37 million people under lockdown, as cases are crossing the 3,000 mark on a daily basis. The United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution to proclaim March 15th as the International Day to combat Islamophobia. The resolution was moved by the OIC countries. However, India said it had concerns over phobias against one religion being elevated to the level of an international day. A 7.4 magnitude earthquake hit the Japanese coast of Fukushima, triggering a small tsunami. There was no impact on the Fukushima nuclear plant. However, the high-speed Shinkansen train running between Fukushima and Miyagi was derailed. No injuries were reported. Nazanin Ratcliffe, a British-Iranian national, is now back at her home in the UK after being imprisoned in a jail in Tehran for the last 6 years. She had been arrested in 2016 after being accused of plotting to overthrow the regime in Iran. Chile's youngest ever president, Gabriel Boric, took the oath of office. A left-leaning former student leader, Boric's term marks a sharp political shift in Chile. Boric faces challenges like combating an economic slowdown and high inflation.
With that, we're taking a very quick break. Up next, Sri Lanka seeks an economic lifeline from India and investment in its ambitious Port City Colombo project. A special report coming up after the break. Welcome back. The Sri Lankan finance minister made another visit to India this week, seeking a $1 billion line of credit as the country faces a serious economic downturn. Amidst this, there's also growing angst against the Rajapaksa family for its vice-like grip on the country and the thrust on large projects like the Colombo Port City that many believe is not the need of the hour. Here's my special report from Colombo. Sri Lanka, a maritime hub in the Indian Ocean, but feeling rudderless at the moment due to a critical economic situation. The double whammy of inflation and the crushing burden of foreign debt is leading to resentment in the public that is spilling on the streets with chants of "Go home, Gotabaya." The repeated visits of the Sri Lankan finance minister, Basil Rajapaksa, are meant to seek a financial lifeline from India. This time, a $1 billion line of credit for essential items, including food. However, Sri Lanka's economic problems have been in the making, and the debt trap is largely blamed on the Rajapaksas and their proximity to China. I'm standing on the Indian Ocean. Yes, the land beneath my feet has been literally created from the Indian Ocean. 269 hectares of reclaimed land just south of the Colombo port with the help of Chinese investment and Chinese involvement. And that brings us to the critical question of the China versus India equation in Sri Lanka. What you see behind me are the two container terminals, the East Container Terminal of the Colombo port and the West Container Terminal. The East Container Terminal was a point of controversy not too long back because of the fact that Sri Lanka had unilaterally dissolved a deal between itself, India and Japan. Many believed it was at the behest of China. Finally, after much protest, the West Container Terminal now has Indian investment. Despite the turbulence in the relations due to the container terminals, the Sri Lankan side is looking for more Indian investment now, this time in its ambitious Port City Colombo.
From the Port City Commission's point of view, we're targeting a commercial value proposition to Indian companies, and we will ensure that that remains stable and valid for the lifetime of the agreement. The Chinese company have taken all the risk. So from the government standpoint, it really doesn't have anything to lose from the failure of the project. On the other hand, it has a lot to gain from its success, and so does everybody, and that's what we are hoping we could convince investors from India about as well.
But on the ground, the Chinese involvement is ubiquitous. Photos of Chinese President Xi Jinping with Sri Lankan Prime Minister and former President Mahinda Rajapaksa find a prominent place as you enter the auditorium that runs a promotional film of the model port city. The model presents a futuristic picture of what Sri Lanka wants the Port City Colombo to be like.
On the longer term, on the longer horizon, to realize the vision that is Port City and reaching its full maturity will take about 20 years as per our estimate.
The Port City Commission says more than tax holiday benefits, it wants to focus and utilize Sri Lanka's strategic location as a transit between Asia and the West. They try to press home the point that since 70% of the transshipment business on the Colombo port is India's, investing in the Port City Colombo project will be advantageous to the neighbor. Sri Lanka wants to develop the Colombo port city, which is right there behind me, into a swanky destination that will act as a multi-services hub. But for that, they require massive investment into the infrastructure that is to be built on that reclaimed land. And who has helped reclaim that land? It's done by a Chinese state-owned company, and therefore 43% of that land is currently on a 99-year lease with the Chinese. Under those circumstances, will Sri Lanka find it difficult to attract investment, especially from India? That remains a question. Out of the 269 hectares of reclaimed land, 116 hectares is on lease to the Chinese harbour engineering company, the CHEC, which is a subsidiary of China's state-owned company, China Communication and Construction Company, CCCC. But the Sri Lankan side says it's a sovereign asset of the Sri Lankan government and the developer can only use it for commercial purposes.
They can either sell the right that they have been given to the 99-year lease, or they can develop it further and recover their investment over a longer time. But they have no rights or control or any residual, shall we say, obligation from the government towards them for any of that.
But the opposition in Sri Lanka has been sceptical due to the act that gives the Commission a free hand to develop the project. Some believe the port city would turn into a province of China as it has its own jurisdiction too. The general public is increasingly viewing such projects as wasteful when the country is struggling with basics like food and electricity. The project also ran into rough waters with environmentalists and the fisher folks. 20 cases against the project had reached the Supreme Court. There was stiff resistance from environmental groups over this reclamation project. The fishermen community too gave a pushback, saying that it will impact their livelihood. Finally, it was a 30-member committee that gave a go-ahead to this project, but with 72 conditions, which were meant to protect both livelihood and the environment. The Commission says they have done a thorough impact assessment and cost-benefit analysis.
The biggest resistance from the people, the politicians and the environmentalists was that reclamation of this land and extraction of sand for the reclamation work may impact the coastline, the coastal erosion. So they perceived that the south of Colombo and the north of Colombo may wash off due to this reclamation work. And we did a comprehensive study using modern technologies like mathematical modeling, using our own universities, the research institutions, and proved that this reclamation may not cause any significant coastal erosion in this region.
The land reclamation has been done in a record time of 30 months for China, but now the process has slackened due to the lack of investors, apart from the high-end marina that has been leased. Sri Lanka hopes that India, which does a bulk of its shipment through this route, will find value in investing. They also say that inquiries have been made by the US and German embassy about the Port City project. They claim the project doesn't fall under China's contentious Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI. But yet, the overt involvement of China in Sri Lanka under the Rajapakshas remains a hurdle that Sri Lanka well realizes. This as India remains wary of China's string of pearls theory of surrounding it using assets around India, including the Sri Lanka ports. In Colombo, with cameraman Rahul Malhotra, Maha Siddiqui, CNN News 18. Well, that's it then for today. See you again next week. Bye-bye.